Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's Return to Campus Athletics Information Session. My name is John Jaramillo. I'm the Director of Athletics here at Roosevelt. Today we'll be joined by Vice President of Enrollment Management and Athletics, Mike Cassidy, and Vice President of Student Affairs and the Dean of Students, Jamar Orr. Now, I'll turn it over to Mike to introduce and go over today's overview of the forum.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone is safe and well. Today's information session is a forum for information sharing, where we can update you on our current status as it relates to athletics and our institutional return to campus plan, as well as an opportunity for you to ask questions on areas where you need additional information or additional clarity is needed. Throughout the information session, you can submit those questions in the Q&A section of this Zoom. After some brief information sharing, John will review those questions and we will discuss those. We will attempt to get through as many of them as we can during our 1-hour information session. So as we begin, the key priority through all of this, as we adapt to the coronavirus, COVID-19, is the health and safety of our university and larger community. This is our ultimate priority. And our return to campus plan and any potential return to activities plan will reflect that. There are some core principles and commitments, though, that we have made in terms of potential return to activities related to athletics this fall. First, no student athlete, coach, or athletic department staff member, including game day personnel, should feel compelled to engage in any activity for which they do not feel safe or comfortable. Second, all student athlete athletic leadership awards and any athletic related scholarships will be honored regardless of a student's participation. We want each of our community members to make the decision they feel best for them and should not feel compelled to do so because of a scholarship or athletic leadership award. Thus, again, I want to echo that all student athlete athletic leadership awards and athletic related scholarships will be honored regardless of participation. So as we evaluate a return to campus as it relates to the resumption of athletic activities, there are two areas in which we are taking into consideration. First, we needed to plan for a safe return to fall activities with the creation of an institutional return to activities plan. This return to activities plan was initially drafted by the core leadership team of our athletic department, and then the layers of how individual sport programs would implement this return to activities plan was done by each of our head coaches and staff members. Parallel to this, though, as we began to finalize the return to activities plan was a daily evaluation on if said plan could be operationalized. And we looked at several functions to see if the plan could be executed safely. We are constantly monitoring changes to public health guidelines from the city and state. We are also reviewing updated guidance from our national associations and our conference associations, like the National Association of Intercollegiate Athletics, the NAIA, and the conference at which a majority of our intercollegiate athletic teams compete, the Chicagoland Collegiate Athletic Conference. To look at some of these considerations more acutely, though, you might be wondering what evaluations are we taking into consideration related to a potential return to athletic activities this fall, or perhaps potentially postponing athletic activities to spring. Students first. This is something you constantly hear echoed throughout our athletic department, that when it comes to student athletes, they are students first. Thus, any return to activities plan cannot infringe on or compete with our overall return to campus plan. And the academic pursuits of all of our students come first. So being able for us to safely resume the academic portion of our return to campus plan is a priority. Second, we know that there'll be variables outside of our control as we look at operationalizing any return to activities plan. Examples of this include access to testing and the timeliness of testing results. We have seen within the state of Illinois that testing, while available, the results have taken a longer time than anticipated to be received. So thus the ideals of trying to have student athletes tested prior to their first date of competition, which is a requirement of the NAIA, we will have to figure out a way, if this plan is executed, to be able to do so in a timely manner. State guidelines. We are evaluating the fact that our state has articulated that should the positivity rate of the coronavirus continue to escalate in the state of Illinois, it might return to phase 3 of the Restore Illinois plan, which would impede on the ability for any return to activities plan to be executed. Similarly, the city of Chicago has additional ordinances which might preclude the resumption of activities this fall or create additional challenges. An example of this is the current 14-day travel restriction that will require students coming from states listed as having escalated coronavirus cases that are outlined on the city's website, having to quarantine for 14 days prior to coming to campus, or this would also include our potential opponents that are scheduled would have to quarantine prior to those competitions. Lastly, even if we were able to implement a safe return to activities plan, does this result in a positive student athlete experience? We know a return to activities plan will be both prescriptive and restrictive. It will do so around practices as well as competition schedules. There will be limited competitions. We will see travel logistics greatly heightened and challenged. We have articulated that if we were to have a return to activities plan, we would not have fans in attendance at our games. These are just some of the examples that might erode the student athlete experience as we try to implement it this fall, and might lead us to a near conclusion that the best option is to postpone activities until the spring semester. What I want to do now, though, is really open the floor to you, our student athletes, the parents, family members, community members, guardians of our student athletes, to ask the questions you have about our return to campus plan, our return to activities plan, and any additional information or clarity you need. So John, I'll turn it back over to you to begin this process.
Yes, thanks, Mike. And once again, there's a Q&A option there for you all to type in your questions, and we'll look through them and get to as many as we can. So I'll start off with a question about spectators, Mike. So there's a question about spectators being allowed, kind of dives into a secondary follow-up question about seniors being allowed to have parents at senior night activities.
So our current return to activities plan for the fall would limit and exclude any participants outside of those actual performing within the competition, i.e. there would be no fan attendance. We could look at potentially alternatives as it relates to senior nights and those related activities to events that would be separate from the game day experience, but those would have to be exceptions and looked at on a case-by-case basis, and affirm that we could have these activities in a safe manner. But what we realized is, due to the fact that many of the facilities that we do practice and compete at are facilities at which we do not control in totality, there will be users before and after our teams, and we can't control that level of access. So it's one variable at which we thought it best to limit in order to most assure that we could successfully have the competition generally.
Couple of questions about nursing students, or if there are special considerations for nursing students that will be going into hospitals. there was another follow-up question about nursing students. If they graduate in March, would they be allowed to play, particularly if there's any postponement to spring?
Yes, so as part of a return to activities plan, we would have a regimented screening process. So that would be for all of our student athletes, regardless of whether they're residential or commuter or, in the nursing program. We would monitor those. And if we see, though, that there's an acute need for additional screening or potentially additional testing required, we can look at implementing those measures. Those are the examples of some of the nuances of a return to activities plan that we will navigate as we implement it, with an understanding that we, as much as we try to, create an answer to every potential outcome, there are some that we will not realize until the plan initially gets implemented.
There were questions about specific programs falling under this umbrella. So one in particular was about dance for when it comes to testing or, various aspects, all programs being covered under this.
Yes, all programs. This includes intercollegiate athletics, varsity sports, our club sports programs, cheer, dance, spirit, performing arts, esports, as well as our athletic activities that occur in our other locations, such as Peoria. All of these would fall under both the general return to campus plan, as well as the acute athletic department return to activities plan for the fall.
A couple of similar questions in regards to spring. So if things are postponed to spring, if that is clear or not. If that is the case, will practices be able to continue? Would students be allowed to be on campus? So that's kind of related to any potential for moving to spring when it comes to fall sports or other activities related to the fall.
Yeah, those are the kind of parallels we are examining as it relates to potentially moving activities from the fall to the spring. The current thought process would be, if we were to move schedules in totality, if let's say the NAIA and the conference were to move the championships for fall sports to spring, what we would do would be looking at still the conducting of limited team activities in the fall. The benefits potentially of a spring plan would be, it would allow us to very purposefully and slowly implement these team activities in a way, kind of step by step. We could ensure, health and safety benchmarks are being met and not feel rushed because there is a game on the schedule in the next, 2 weeks or 3 weeks after our initial return to campus. Even if activities schedules, let's say, for competitions are postponed to the spring, that would not limit any student's ability to return to campus generally, move into the residence hall specifically, because it would not impact the resumption of other activities on campus, such as classes, student activities generally.
If a student does not feel safe to play, who is not on athletic scholarship, would they not be allowed to be on their team?
No, if a student does not feel comfortable, this would not impact their ability to be on the team moving forward once they do feel comfortable returning to campus, or resuming athletic participation, I should say more specifically.
Will masks be provided?
Yes, a mask will be provided to all students, faculty, and staff as part of return to campus. We would advise, as always, though, for students to bring multiple masks with them to campus as they return. Masks will be required in all areas on campus, and that will be a part of the general institution's return to campus plans, as well as the athletic department return to campus plan.
A couple of questions here about when an athlete tests positive, what happens? What happens if someone on the team has COVID-19 and it has been around everyone? Does everyone have to quarantine for 14 days since being in contact?
Yes, so we will have, as part of this plan, a protocol and procedure that will be in alignment with what is the university's return to campus plan for a student who tests positive for COVID-19 as it relates to the, in close contact with whether as a student or whether as a student athlete, you are in close contact with someone who has tested positive for COVID-19. Yes, we will implement a 14-day quarantine period or self-isolation period. And that's one of the challenges that we know is the safe resumption of athletic activities, is this could be something that leads to an entire athletic team needing to quarantine or isolate in order to ensure that there is not an increased spread of the virus. And this could mean the postponement or cancellation of games, schedules, activities, et cetera, due to this fact. Again, though, our ultimate priority is the health and safety, not only of our, the student athletes, let's say in a particular program, but the university community at large. And so we will take those steps to ensure that safety.
Many questions regarding any deadline or timeline for a decision about fall activities or fall seasons. If a fall season is canceled, does that mean games only or games and practices? Again, there are some families that, as far as arranging housing or apartments, as far as what the timeline would be.
Yeah, we understand the timelines that everyone is under individually as related to the items mentioned in terms of housing off campus, making arrangements to return to campus to live in residence life, et cetera. We will have a final determination no later than the end of this week, if not sooner, to just allow enough time for adjustments to be made. But we know that there are meetings being conducted this week by the NAIA and the Chicagoland Collegiate Athletic Conference, as all of the institutions, similar to Roosevelt, are analyzing a safe return to fall activities on a day-to-day basis. We know the guidelines in the public health space have changed, almost daily over the last 3 weeks specifically. So those are ongoing, and we are awaiting, because we know should there be a decision to move schedules to spring, the questions that were a part of this initial question related to the ability to practice, what impacts that would be on eligibility, and those type of layers beneath a decision to postpone competition until spring. We would like to have as many of those answered by our national and conference associations to provide that information to you as soon as possible. But we do anticipate having all of that information, or at least as much as we can, to you before the end of the week.
Question about testing. It is said that we need to be tested before we are allowed to move on campus, begin playing. What is the time frame we would need to be tested, get the results? Do we need to have our results 5 days before or be tested 5 days before? So
I'll let Jamar answer that question.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. As it relates to COVID-19 testing, that is correct. You are required to have a negative COVID test at least 5 days prior to moving into the residence halls. And this requirement only applies to our residential students. It does not apply to our other student populations. So if you are a student who's intending to move into the residence halls this fall, you will need a negative COVID-19 test, and that test has to be dated 5 days prior to your to your move-in to campus.
Jamar, there's another one, another question about housing. If we're in housing and we choose not to come for the fall, what is the likelihood we will lose our housing for the spring?
So if you currently have a housing contract and you cancel the contract, you're actually canceling the full academic year contract. And say you decide to return in spring, which is totally acceptable, you have to sign a new housing contract. So your current bed will not necessarily be held for you, but we will likely have additional spaces. And so I don't anticipate that there will be no space come spring for a student who decides to cancel their fall contract. But just remember that if you're going to cancel your fall contract, that has to be done prior to your move-in date. Otherwise, you're responsible for the full portion of the fall contract.
If a student already knows that their classes are online for the first semester and coming from one of the states that requires a 14-day quarantine and their sport would be in the spring, can they stay at home and return in January?
Would you like me to take that one?
Sure.
Okay, so I'm glad this question was asked because it allows me to clarify the City of Chicago's order. So as Mike said, these orders and the guidance is changing regularly. So on July 2nd, the city put out a policy that says anyone coming from a quote unquote surge state has to quarantine for 14 days. The original guidance did not allow that quarantine to happen in the City of Chicago. It had to happen, I'm sorry, it could have happened in the City of Chicago. It did not allow it to happen in the home state where the surge was occurring. As of last Wednesday, they have changed that directive so that now a student who is returning to Roosevelt and needing to quarantine because they are in one of the states that's listed in the order, you can quarantine for 14 days at home in your home state. So that is an important clarification that we wanted to make today, and a email notification will be sent to that effect. So just to clarify one more time, if you are in a surge state, that 14-day quarantine period can occur at home in your surge state. You'll just need to attest that that has been done in compliance with the city's order when you move into campus on your particular move-in date.
There is a question about if an athlete is coming from another quote unquote hot state but living off campus, do you require quarantine since you are going to be around other students who might be in the dorms?
So yes, the City of Chicago quarantine policy does not only impact residents. This particular policy is for anyone who's coming into the City of Chicago from one of the listed states. So whether you are a residential student or not, and you're coming from a quote unquote hotspot state, you are required to do the 14-day quarantine. That 14-day period of quarantine, however, can be in your home state as long as you do it for 14 days.
And that there was another one about, housing cancellation policies here. How long does it take for a housing contract cancellation request to be processed?
That request shouldn't take longer than 7 actual days. So when you turn it in, I would expect an answer by that next week.
Would athletes have to wear masks during practices and competitions?
Our current plan, as it is written at the moment, states that mask wearing is required except when performing activities or drills related to competition or in the competition itself. But as soon as, let's say, to give an example of men's basketball, you would not be required to wear the mask while participating in the game or in a practice, drill. But if you were to come off of the court and, go to the bench, you would be required to have a mask on at all times when not performing those activities.
In conjunction with fans being allowed at games, will they ever be allowed, and will there be live streaming of games, both home and away, if fans are not allowed to watch the games in person?
We would examine the allowance for fans to attend games should we get to phase 5 of the Restore Illinois plan, at which point there is a vaccine, a treatment, or there has been a significant change in the number of positive tests within the state. So that is to say, if we were to resume fall activities and there was a significant change in one of these areas, we know this is similar to some other elements within a return to activities plans. This will be a fluid policy because we will have to update to the latest public health guidelines. And if we feel as though we could safely do so, we would. Correlated to that, though, we would look at optimizing our live streaming capabilities, both home and away, to allow that access and that ability for our fans, parents, guardians, friends of the program, an ability to watch our student athletes perform in competition.
There's a follow-up about clarifying if the COVID testing done 5 days before move-in date or the results 5 days before the move-in date.
Yes, that will be the results need to be dated 5 days within the move-in date.
What are the new guidelines for entering using the Goodman Center and the Wabash gym? There are a couple of questions related to the Berry Crown Fitness Center on the 5th floor of Wabash and accessibility in general.
For the Wabash building generally, there will be a institutional protocol that will be followed utilizing the Roosevelt app. I welcome everyone, if they look at the schedule of events on the Roosevelt website, there is an information session upcoming that specifically will walk students through the updates made to the Roosevelt app, which will kind of be your access tool to enter facilities. So there will be a screening process that all students will go to enter the Wabash building, and the fitness center being in the Wabash building would be part of that access plan. In terms of the Goodman Center, we will look at that as an additional screening area. And we will be both, and this is where it gets back to my previous comment of being very prescriptive and then somewhat restrictive. We will assign student athletes times when they will come to the Goodman Center and be allowed in the Goodman Center, because we want to keep that facility as safe as possible, and also to allow to ensure that there's appropriate staffing at that facility to provide that screening. So that is where some of the norms will change for our returning student athletes specifically, where that has been a pretty open access facility. As long as you had your active ID card, you could scan yourself into that facility. That would no longer be the case for the fall. The access to the facility would be limited to times at which we're approved for you to access the facility, and there would be a special screening process as part of entering that facility, which includes filling out a screening questionnaire, temperature checks, etc.
There are a couple of questions related to a serology test that has shown that the student athletes have immunity to COVID-19. Would they still have to quarantine, especially with exposure to a newly confirmed teammate occurs? So just addressing, the immunity piece.
Yeah, currently we are going with what is the institutional policy related to both anyone who is tested positive for COVID-19 in terms of a 14-day quarantine period, as well as those in close contact with that individual, again, to best provide safety for our entire Roosevelt community. We know that this goes back to where there could be adjustments made to that based on updated public health guidance from the Center of Disease Control or the state of Illinois, et cetera. But currently the plan as does require a 14-day quarantine period.
Just going through a lot of these questions here to try to catch up on some. There are other conferences and leagues that have made their decisions. Why is Roosevelt, the Chicagoland Collegiate Athletic Conference, and NAI waiting so long to take any action?
We are the NAIA, which is the National Association for a majority of our intercollegiate athletic teams, represents over 200 institutions across the country, all of which have different state guidelines, different local ordinances. So trying to collectively kind of come together on a single pathway, I think takes a little time. And I think the changes that have been seen nationally in terms of the escalation of COVID-19 positive cases across the country the last 3 weeks has made the National Association and many of the local conferences rethink what maybe seemed like stronger plans for fall in terms of the ability to resume activities. So I think given that the possibility exists for the postponement of fall activities to spring, they are working on what the potential impacts that would have on eligibility schedules, et cetera, for when announcement of that really significant magnitude is made, that as many of those questions are answered. We institutionally know, though, that we might have to make an independent decision because ultimately we need to do what's best for Roosevelt University for the safety and health of our entire community at large. And those are all the things we are working diligently with the NAIA and the CCAC on to have a decision made in short order.
A couple of related questions regarding testing, particularly with the time frame that it might take to get results back. I think there's concern here about the 5-day window if some tests do not come back within that time. And then following up, there's also a question about if COVID testing is going to be available on campus for students and staff members, and if so, an out-of-pocket cost.
It's a really great question. We are still actively looking at a variety of partners who will potentially provide testing on campus. We have not finalized a particular partnership just yet. Thus, I'm unable to share the particular details around what days testing will occur, as well as how many tests per week. We'll have, as soon as we have that information, we'll be communicating that out to the community, but we're still very much actively pursuing that particular thing. As it relates to the days of testing, if a student does not have a negative COVID test dated 5 days out from their move-in, they will have to move into the quarantine floor, which will be on our 19th floor until they can obtain a test. We have provided a list of Chicago locations on our FAQ, on our COVID FAQ website that provides both free as well as private options for COVID-19 testing. The rapid tests in Chicago tend to come back within 4 days. We're not requiring any particular type of test. We're more so giving individuals the freedom and the latitude to choose the type of test, but just simply stating that it has to be dated within 5 days of move-in, but still also providing a number of options for students who, for whatever reason, depending on where they are, couldn't get a test or the test didn't come back quickly enough.
What happens if we go back to phase 3 in the Restore Illinois plan? Can people get out of their housing contract due to hardship caused by COVID-19?
So unfortunately, no. So we've intentionally created these 2 out periods in the contract to avoid this question. So a student has absolutely no obligation to stay with us. The housing requirement was done away with for this year. We also created the out period prior to fall move-in, as well as prior to spring move-in. So if a student chooses to remain in the housing contract post those 2 move-in periods, they will be responsible for the full portion of the housing contract, despite what may be going on with COVID-19. That is because we will not be closing our residence halls, even if we move back into a phase 3. And classes go online, the residence halls will remain open. And as long as those residence halls remain open, there will not be a COVID refund in the way that the question was posed.
A couple of questions about how the Goodman Center will look like, if, in terms of any reconfiguration or entry protocol, and then a follow-up would concerns whether athletic trainers and coaches will be available in person at Goodman Center, even if that's by appointment, following the app protocol or meetings through Zoom.
Yes, we will have changes to the traffic patterns within the Goodman Center that are in alignment with keeping, with what we determine is the best measures to, ensure that we can keep those areas clean, sanitized, but also have clear direction for for those that are visiting the Goodman Center, primarily our student athletes, coaches, and staff, that they know where to go. We will have athletic trainer access. It will, though, need to be, again, scheduled and much more prescribed than in maybe moments past, just to ensure we have those trainers available to you, and the additional measures that our athletic training staff will have to layer in for their own protection and safety as well. We have ordered all the necessary PPE equipment, et cetera, to ensure that those services can be conducted in a safe manner. But again, we are kind of continuing to work through those based on how we are going to layer in the schedules for each of our fall and other non-championship sports that still have activities in the fall. We are receiving those schedules now from the respective programs, and then we will build out the access schedules for our student athletes to, coaches and to our athletic trainers. But it's going to require kind of the one element is, that I should probably echo over and over again, is scheduling. It's going to take, a lot of scheduling. Activities will be much more scheduled in the past. And so we will all have to kind of be thinking about that, because, there'll be less ability for, last minute type operations or activities to take place because of some of the, again, prescriptive scheduling that will need to be implemented to have activities done safely this fall.
Jamar, there were some questions about some of the meal plan refunds. A student that lived on campus last spring received a meal plan refund up to $400. What happens to that refund if they do not plan on living on campus this upcoming fall? And then there was also a question about any meal plan credits from the University Center from the past spring.
Great questions. So a student who received the $400 meal plan credit in the spring, that credit was applied to your student account. So whether or not you come to housing again in the fall or not, that credit will remain on your account. As long as you sign up for courses, you will have a bill, and that $400 will automatically be deducted from your bill. It doesn't have anything to do with whether or not you have a housing charge or a dining charge this fall. So it is applied to a student account. As it relates to the University Center, I have very, very good news to share. We recently got our credit from the University Center due to COVID-19 last Friday. And so as of today, the list of all students who qualify for the credit at the University Center, their credits will be applied at some point this week to their student accounts as well. And that would be a little over a $500 credit for those students who qualify.
There were some questions about move-in dates as far as some of the early reporting teams. I know that football was initially scheduled to move in as early as next week, and they are not moving in next week based off of what their conference discussions are. But as far as anything related to fall sports and move-in, the timeliness of that communication regarding to allow for housing move-in, there are a lot of related questions to that. In addition, there are some programs who are currently starting practices, say dance and marching band, that are starting practices mid-August as far as plans for them at this time.
So we're coordinating with the athletic department to make determinations around the move-in dates for each athletic team, and that's going to look different depending on, of course, your team and what the schedule is, but we are very much in close coordination and collaboration with athletics on what those dates will be. And as soon as those are solidified, we will be sure to let you guys know also of any changes, because I know that some people have been communicated dates to, so as those change, we'll be sure to update those. I don't know if there's more up-to-date information that I don't have, but as we have it, we'll be sure to make those updates.
And we understand that not all of our participants in activities will be resident students. So those students who are commuting, we will have sent to you prior to those activities, I should say, taking place, how our potential return to activities plan relates to your program specifically, and any measures that need to be taken related to testing or screening prior to conducting any of those activities. Those will come as a follow-up to any broader decisions we make at the end of this week.
Question: if somebody asks if they heard that if athletics are postponed and a student cancels their residency, they can't attend the fall semester remotely or as a commuter.
That is not true. So
that is incorrect.
Yeah, your housing assignment doesn't have anything to do with your ability to take classes online or to be a commuter student. So that is completely up to you as a student, as a family, to decide. There is no obligation that if you are not in housing and you're an athlete that you can't take remote classes or be a commuter.
If we are rooming with a teammate but chose to come in January, can we assure our roommate status will stay?
I think if I'm understanding the question correctly, if you cancel your fall contract, but you have a roommate and they decide to stay, will your space still be there come spring to live with that roommate? Please, adjust the question if I'm understanding it incorrectly. But based on the way that I'm reading the question, no. Unfortunately, we can't guarantee that your space will still be there come spring semester, because anyone will be allowed to move into that space once you cancel your contract. But of course, I do anticipate that we'll have open rooms come spring. So if you are very much dedicated to living with a particular individual, we will likely have some open spaces where you and that individual could move in together. But your specific room that you set aside for or register for in fall will be canceled once you cancel your housing contract, and that room will then be open for someone else to move into.
Question about international students. If an international student has a 14-day quarantine abroad before entering the United States, is there a need for a second 14-day quarantine period? Or is a negative test enough?
So unfortunately, the CDC guidance and the City of Chicago guidance are different on this particular question. So for an international student, the CDC guidance governs. So they say that you need to quarantine 14 days once you arrive to the United States. And that's a period. There's nothing after that. So if you're coming from a space that's international, even if you've quarantined for 14 days in that country, you still have to quarantine for another 14 days when you return. For a student who is in the States, in one of the surge states, that quarantine can be done only once at your house for the required 14-day period prior to you coming to campus. So the answer in short is yes, you would have to quarantine if you so chose in your state, but you'd still be required to quarantine for 14 days once you arrive from that particular country.
Some questions about traveling to and from away competitions, and in a lot of cases that's going to pertain to practices off-site. Any specific plans or adjustments being made in regards to team student travel?
Yeah, so currently our return to activities plan includes a couple elements. There will be no air travel. There will be no university-sponsored overnight travel. Any travel we do conduct, whether for practice or competition, will have social distancing woven into it. So we have worked through this plan to say only a certain number of individuals can be in a 15-person passenger van. I think the last plan was that would be 6. And so we will make sure that any transportation vehicle we utilize, even if that is with a third party, has social distancing measures put in place to be in compliance in that regard. That will mean, though, we will need additional transportation. So in many cases, if we're used to having 2 buses go to a practice, we will now potentially have as many as 4. Or, we could, instead of, 2 vans taking 30 people, now imagine that will be at least 5 vans to take those individuals. So those are some of the layers that we are working through to ensure that any fall activity plan can be implemented safely. But the rules, or I should say guidelines around overnight travel and air travel really are put in place to ensure we can have safety and public health in front and prioritized as much as possible in terms of the resumption of activities.
Will masks be required during such transportation?
Yes, so masks would be required during such transportation to and from any athletic practice or competition. But this again gets into the nuances of a plan like this of, how do we ensure nutrition, hydration, those elements during the course of transportation. So we will, layered into our return to activities plan, will be how we can ensure that individuals will be wearing masks, but also that the breaks can occur where we can provide both nutrition and hydration as needed.
What if athletes don't feel comfortable traveling? Can they compete in home contest only?
That is something we'll look at on a case-by-case basis, but we will look at making accommodations where we can as part of our overall return to activities plan.
There are questions about coaches. Will coaches require testing, and what happens if a coach tests positive?
The protocols for student athletes will be the same as protocols for our community members, whether those be coaches, faculty, staff, etc., regarding testing and regarding a protocol for 14-day quarantine. The testing element, though, will probably be specific to our athletic department and coaches. That is not something that's part of the broader institutional return to campus plan, but is something we will implement as part of a return to activities plan.
Will this have any impact on work study jobs or anything regarding student employment?
This should not, related to work study employment. Those are things that we want to ensure that our students still have access to student employment, because we know what a key component that is to your attendance at the university and your overall experience within the university. There might be different opportunities available than that were in prior years, but there still will be access to student employment and federal work study for our students as it was in prior years.
Question about this past spring, if things go back to normal, will Roosevelt do anything for the seniors from last spring that missed out on their senior days?
Those are definitely things I'd love to operationalize if we are able to do so, is to figure out ways we can honor those who had, especially the seniors who had their seasons, cut short, and find a way to honor and recognize them during the fall or potentially again during the spring seasons, if we are safely allowed to do so. I do want to find a way we can recognize those student athletes.
If dual sport athletes, if student athletes play spring sports, will they still have fall and winter sport practices pending on what happens with the upcoming year?
Spring sport student athletes could still potentially have team activities during the fall semester. Those are some of the things that we are making final determinations of this week based on what our overall plan is.
More follow-ups about the 14-day quarantine. If you're doing the 14-day quarantine in your home state, how will one confirm that with the school? Know that Jamar had mentioned a notice going out to the campus community, but if you wanted to address that, Jamar.
Yeah, so the City of Chicago guidance does not stipulate what type of verification should go into the quarantine process. So here at Roosevelt, what we'll be doing is we'll be asking you to attest to the fact or to verify that you have actually done the 14-day quarantine and that you're in compliance with the City of Chicago's policy. And this will be likely in the form of a DocuSign. And then thereafter, every single day while the order remains, students will be asked to attest to this in the app. And the reason we have to do this every single day is because you may have gone to one of these states on a weekend, and we have to make sure that you are still in compliance and have done the required 14-day quarantine. So there is no specific documentation that you'll need to provide, as much as you'll just need to sign off on a document saying that you have successfully completed the 14-day quarantine.
Will teams be allowed to take public transportation to practices?
We have no current limitation against how a student or student athlete accesses campus or accesses one of our practice facilities. We will have screening measures put in place at all of these facilities, those that are off campus. So it will go through a regular screening process, whether that student be coming on a team sponsored mode of transportation or utilizing their own transportation or using public transportation.
There's a parent from a team that was interested in finding other families that would like to brainstorm quarantining options, was asking for help connecting. My recommendation would be to work with the respective sport coach, but I'll leave that, if you wanted to address that, Mike.
No, I would, say that's a good starting point would be to connect with the coach, to connect with the student athletes, perhaps within a program. And then those can be looked at more broadly too, to see if we have commonality amongst our sports programs, to see if there's something very collectively we can message or assist with in regards to that 14-day quarantine period.
If you are in a 14-day quarantine and most of your classes are in person, how will you receive that information from that class? Very professor email oriented, but that's just my quick hitter. If you guys have any follow up on that.
Even our
yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
All of our courses that a student will take in person will have opportunities for students to engage in that class remotely as well. We know that our professors will, and we've discussed this, they will make any and every accommodation for our students, with an understanding that a student's comfortability in participating in a class could change on a class to class basis. And because we know we have these measures put in place related to potentially needing to isolate or quarantine, that we do not want that to disrupt the academics pursuits of that specific student or group of students. So all of those accommodations can be made to easily kind of transition between face-to-face and remote during the course of the academic semester.
There are just a lot of the similar questions, different wording about decisions, timeline. I think some folks have entered the form late, but as far as timeline for what fall will look like or any other decisions related to the upcoming year of athletics.
Yeah, I really appreciate everyone's patience as we kind of work through this and the ever-changing public health guidelines. We are looking at having a determination no later than the end of this week, if not sooner, on what our plans will be for fall, either moving forward with a fall activities plan, at which point we would publicly share that returned activities plan, or potentially a decision to postpone scheduled competition to the spring semester, most likely in conjunction with similar decisions made by the NAIA and CCAC. Again, the two associations where a majority of our intercollegiate athletic teams participate in. If we can get that sooner than the end of the week, we'll announce it. But, I would anticipate us, we will have, once that announcement is made as well, I do want to note, we will set up a similar forum because we know there will be a bevy of additional questions that will come based on either, finalization of either pathway. And so we want to be open and share information and be available to answer as many questions as you have, irrespective of the decision we make. Again, I thank you in advance for your patience as we work through all the nuances to make sure we are making the decision that best keeps our student athletes, coaches, staff, our entire Roosevelt University community safe.
Will branch campuses have to abide by City of Chicago quarantine rules with regards to visitors from high frequency states or flare-up states is what it was coined as?
Our institutional policy will I'll say govern all of our locations. There are some nuances in there again as it relates to Peoria having a different potentially public health guidelines surrounding its access to its campus that are different than that of the City of Chicago, and we'll work through that kind of on a case-by-case basis, with understanding that one might seem or in reality be more restrictive than another, or just put on additional guidelines or measures than the other, and we will look at those specifically as those guidelines get updated.
Will admissions be open for recruits to get tours as we reopen Roosevelt? What procedures are in place if the recruit is from one of the quarantine states?
We will begin a broad return to campus on August 3rd. And that will begin to include things such as campus visits. What I would request though is that those not take place on August 3rd, 4th, 5th. If you could please give us a short amount of time for all of our staff to return to campus and kind of ourselves. Many of, if not most all of our staff have not been on campus since March, and the campuses have changed since March to implement safety measures, to implement social distancing measures, to allow our staff to get acclimated, and then we can begin to schedule out these visits accordingly. As it relates to the 14-day quarantine period, that would have to be done similarly as a resident student who would have to confirm that they have adhered to the city's 14-day quarantine period prior to visiting campus, even if that is just as a visitor, and the same as a resident student. Those are things though that we are looking at related to campus visits to make sure we are making our visitors aware that they need to be in compliance with that directive upon visiting campus.
Will the original plan of having varsity and varsity reserve teams with the abundance of new athletes coming to campus still be in effect?
If we are to resume fall activities, we will do our best to provide opportunities for participations for all of our student athletes, regardless of varsity or varsity reserve status. That goes back to, though, the kind of initial element I said, where we're constantly evaluating the return to activities plan to ensure that, even a truncated schedule still provides a positive experience for our student athletes in terms of meeting their expectations of what participation in athletics means.
So a couple questions about limited team activities allowed in the fall if fall were to be postponed to spring.
So limited team activities is I know a broad definition that probably does not have the detail that, individual student athletes, parents, et cetera, are looking for. That would mean, imagine in a space where, let's say, I'm going to use basketball as an example, where, what would be individual instruction or some of the spring out after the championship season has ended activities would be, or for football, it could potentially mean flip-flopping what is usually the spring season in terms of practices and activities to the fall and having the competition season in the spring. We would, if we go down the path of postponing to spring, we would work very intentionally and individually with all of our sport programs to outline what activities we would like to resume, and we would build out a very slow and very methodical timeline for implementation of those, and really use those as setting the kind of guidelines, because the reality is we could still find ourselves, if we postpone activities to the spring, in a similar public health space in January and February as we are now. The benefit, though, is by slowly and methodically implementing some team activities, we will have learned a lot about how to safely conduct those activities, which then might allow us to feel more comfortable with engaging in a broader return to activities plan in the spring, even if some of the public health concerns still exist, but those would be evaluated again, ongoing, as we persist through the fall and into the winter months.
Question about class schedule that they've been emailing and haven't gotten an answer about class schedules. Is that would be something as far as working with an advisor, or if can't find that information, maybe working with the coach, and I can help in that regard as well.
Absolutely, and we know this especially is probably impacting our students within the College of Experiential Learning, due to the data integration as part of the broader integration between Robert Morris and Roosevelt. That data integration was just completed earlier this month, and we are just beginning the process of enrolling those students who were prior students in programs that are now in the experiential college into their coursework for fall. And so that should be conducted in the coming days.
How would practices or activities look with larger teams, such as 65 students on a baseball team, a lot more on the football team, and the like? Yeah,
they would all have measures of social distancing implemented. I've really appreciated some of the plans that have been already shared with me by our respective head coaches with detailed skill instruction of how this could be implemented. But you will see a lot more small group activity. You will see multiple sessions of practices run throughout the course of a day. So there will, most likely be, if there is a resumption of fall activities, few times when all members of the team are on a practice field or in a practice space at the same time, just given the number of participants we are allowed to have in any one space, given current state guidelines, but as similarly as to the classrooms that you would sit in for the face-to-face classes you have, there will be a limited number of individuals in those spaces as well. So we will have social distancing kind of woven into every activity we do.
There was another class-related question about how do new students get classes, and that would be working with their advisor again. And if their coach can be a bridge to that, that's something that the coach or myself can help with.
Absolutely.
Mike, if you want to wrap up.
Yeah, I want to first and foremost thank everyone for taking the hour to be with us today. We, again, I understand this is a time where there are a lot of challenges presented, and I, wish we were in an environment where we could provide clear information, more detailed information, but given some of the changes to the public health guidelines and us awaiting still some final protocols from the NAI and the CCAC, we feel as though we are close to being able to lay out our plans for fall, but those will be coming later on this week. So again, I appreciate everyone's patience, and I want to close by kind of echoing the statements I made at the very beginning of this session, that our first priority is to have everyone, if we are to resume any activity here at Roosevelt is to do so in a safe manner that keeps our students, faculty, staff, our community safe. And then as it specifically relates to athletics, if there's any situation in which you do not feel comfortable, you do not have to participate. There will be no penalty, and that we will be honoring all athletic leadership awards and athletic scholarships for this year, regardless of a student's participation, given the considerations for public health, safety, and the challenges that, you know, us as an institution adapting to coronavirus have presented. Again, thank you, everyone. I invite you, though, to go to the roosevelt.edu website, look at some of the other information sessions that are scheduled for this week's and next week as well, related to the app and accessing campus, student life, in terms of residence life, etc. Please attend those information sessions because there's going to be a lot of information given about our return to campus, and I think you'll find them to be beneficial.
All right, I think we'll wrap up here. Mike, thank you for being a part of this. Jamar, thank you so much for being a part of this and your partnership with athletics. And I want to thank everybody for joining us today, asking very thoughtful questions as we work on this very important, challenging topic as far as returning to campus, returning to activities. And again, our priority is on safety and well-being over everything. So
thank you, everyone.
Thank you.